Thanks, Jasneet. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Len, I work for a joint powers agency. CCAG, or the City County Association of Governments, is a joint powers agency of all the cities and the county. We work on issues of countywide significance. Primarily, we're the congestion management agency for the county. But since the early 90s, we've managed the countywide stormwater program that works with all of the cities in the county to help them comply with regulations to keep pollution out of stormwater runoff and protect our bay and creeks in the ocean. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing on stormwater and how that ties into climate change adaptation. So in the pre-urban conditions, when it rained, most of the water would soak into the ground and be taken up by vegetation and respired back into the atmosphere. And you'd have some flow going underground, getting into creeks, some of it recharging groundwater. But you'd have very little surface runoff. And then with urbanization, we've come in and created significant amounts of impervious area with all of our buildings and our roadways, so that water that used to fall on the ground has no ability to get into the ground. Basically, we've designed our cities to get this water away from our buildings and structures as quickly as possible, treat stormwater as a waste. And so we've created a system that gets the water away very quickly, but we've also created environments that create significant amounts of pollution that can also be captured in stormwater runoff and carried very quickly away out into our creeks, into the bay, into the ocean. And so it's causing a lot of problems. We've got problems with trash. We've got problems with toxic legacy pollutants that are making fish in the bay not safe to eat. And we're eroding our creeks because we've caused significant increases in the volume and the velocity of runoff. And we're causing flooding problems. As we talked about earlier, we've got areas in the county that flood on a regular basis, and so our streets and people's property are being flooded regularly. So our goal is to try to get to more of a balanced situation where we're never going to get back to the pre-development conditions, but if we can strategically start inserting what we call green infrastructure and natural systems into the landscape so that we can capture stormwater closer to where it falls, in smaller areas where it's more manageable, so that we can try to get more water into the ground, help to recharge our groundwater basins, help to filter out pollutants, help to reduce the volume so that we've got less flooding issues and controlling those peak flows. That's sort of where we want to get to. And so this is what we call the balanced development approach. And the positive thing about the fact that we have these stormwater regulations is that there is now a mandate that 76 of the municipalities in the Bay Area, including all of the cities in the county and San Mateo, have to develop what's called a green infrastructure plan, and that has to be done by September of this year and submitted to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So these plans are supposed to show how jurisdictions are going to transform the way they manage stormwater over the coming decades and create more sustainable systems where we're treating stormwater more as a resource, putting in green infrastructure to treat the water, get the water into the ground. But this is also going to have benefits for us in terms of climate adaptation. I think any of you that saw those slides earlier today from Quabana's modeling efforts, future precipitation patterns are going to cause significant problems potentially in terms of flooding lots of areas in conjunction with potential flooding from sea level rise. So we need to look at the fact that we have to do a whole lot of green infrastructure to achieve water quality outcomes. We need to look at both what is that going to do for us in terms of climate adaptation, and do we need to potentially do things any differently than just for water quality purposes to help us adapt to changing climate. So there's sort of three scales of stormwater management that we've been looking at and talking about that I think help to put it in context for people so you can understand what we mean. And the first is parcel scale, and this is really trying to manage the water that falls on a particular parcel. And so this is primarily something that's being dealt with through new and redevelopment, and all of you recognize that there's a ton of new and redevelopment going on throughout the Bay Area these days with the development boom and the strong economy. And so there's been regulations in place since 2005 in San Mateo County. So any significant development project is already required to put in green infrastructure to manage the stormwater that falls on those parcels. So we've already got a fair amount of green infrastructure in the ground, primarily through private projects, but this is also happening on some public projects as well when cities are building new libraries or new fire stations or city hall buildings or things like that. So the next scale up is where you step out a little bit broader and look at the street scale or the neighborhood scale, and this is what we call green streets, and this is where you're putting in green infrastructure into the roadways to capture runoff before it gets into the catch basin and goes into the underground piping systems. And then the larger scale, if you step out further from that, is my time's up, so I'll quickly finish. Regional scale, which is where we're putting in large facilities that are managing entire portions of watersheds. This would be large underground facilities at parks or schools or facilities where you've got lots of areas. So we do have several regional projects that are going forward in the county right now, one in South San Francisco, one in Atherton, and then we've got a couple more that we've got preliminary design funding for in Redwood City and San Bruno. But the thing that I wanted to mention in more detail is the green streets, is that CCAG we did get an adaptation planning grant, and so we are developing what is called the Sustainable Streets Master Plan. I've got some poster boards back there if you want to come take a look at it. But really what we're looking at is integrating green infrastructure with other planned investments in streets, which would include bicycle and pedestrian improvements or complete streets improvements, safe routes to school opportunities for improving the walking and biking environment for kids getting to and from school, pavement rehabilitation opportunities, things like that. So when we integrate complete streets and bicycle pedestrian things with green streets, we call that sustainable streets. And so we are doing a countywide effort to identify the priority roadway segments that make sense to incorporate green infrastructure for stormwater management. So we will be engaging with all the cities on coming up with what are your community priorities for these street segments, and how can we work with you to figure out where it makes sense to incorporate green infrastructure. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested in getting involved in any of that, come see me, or I'll be at the table at the end of the event if you have questions. So thank you.